The Game Week Podcast, powered by Keros. Welcome to episode 4 of the Game Week Podcast, powered by Keros, the number one solution for maximising preparation and performance in elite sport. I'm your host, Andrew Trimble, and every episode we'll be taking a deep dive behind the scenes of the elite sports world as we chat with key stakeholders in high-performance environments about their stories and how they manage their game week. Grant Downie OBE is currently a consultant in medical and performance solutions in elite sport. Grant's been working in the industry since 1984 and has been at the heart of professional football and elite sport ever since, including key roles with the FA, Rangers, Middelsbrough and Man City. He's also had advisory roles with Scottish FA, leading on their COVID RTP and the Premier League and even Cirque Du Soleil. Grant, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I look forward to having a good chat.
I'm interested in a lot of what you have to say, in particular Cirque Du Soleil, but let's not get carried away just yet. Let's start really simply. Why do you do what you do?
I think I do what I do at this stage I'm at in my career because I'm passionate about performance, and I'm passionate about performers being able to perform well, but also then go and lead a healthy life. And I think, we're at a great stage in the evolution of sport where people are realizing you can have top performance and have an afterlife. And you and I know this very well. You've played professional sport, so you understand that, sport is transitional and it'll be a wonderful part of your life. But if it's going to be the only part, you're going to end up in trouble. And so I'm very passionate about not only the performer, but the support staff, the coaching staff, the medical staff, the sports science staff. We all get a little bit hooked and we're all a little bit of adrenaline junkies for sport. But when it ends, you have to have a life. And so for me, it's trying to balance the development of elite performers on the field, off the field in supporting, but people who have a happy and a successful life. And I don't mean we shouldn't judge success by the watch you wear or the car you drive. It's about being happy and content in what you've been able to do. And on that journey, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. That's normal. And I'm trying to get people to realize that, to be brave, to push barriers, you're going to get things wrong, but you've got to keep going.
That's really interesting because if you listen to the High Performance podcast, it's people who are just hell-bent, completely focused, completely driven on one thing. And that is so admirable in a lot of ways. But a lot of times I think people with that mindset, they're spiky and potentially they're not well-rounded and some other aspect of their life will suffer.
Absolutely. And you see, you'll have seen it in rugby and I've seen it in football and I've seen it in other sports that people feel as if, I made the difference. I won an Olympic, you'll hear some of the athletes talking statements like, I won an Olympic gold medal because I trained on Christmas Day. Mm-hmm. Really? Is that the reason why they won an Olympic gold medal? It's not. It's one of the things they did, but they forget their genetic predisposition to be a good athlete. They forget they trained another 364 days of the year. They probably did a lot of night just because and everyone then hooks on that one mantra rather than realizing. And as I said, it to me is no longer enough to be a world champion. So for example, if I think of the sports I've been worked in, I had the great pleasure of working very closely at Rangers in my time at Rangers with Paul Gascoigne. At the time, probably the best English, probably European player of his decade. But when I see where his life is now, it's sad. It's very sad. And I just wish he could be happy. And there are many reasons why that, and it wasn't just football, so it would be wrong just to blame the football industry for that. But I feel we talk about this mantra a lot about high challenge. I think before you highly challenge anyone, you've got to support them and understand. And what I've always tried to do with all sports men and women that I've looked after and staff is I strip that badge off them and ask them about themselves, because that person side of it to me is so important. And if we maximize that development, I think we'll get a better performer, but we'll get a better rounded individual. So it's win-win. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't see it that way because they're just, they're so focused on achieving that gold medal, they forget that their grandmothers died in the corner, and then 10 years later they regret never having seen her. Mm-hmm. But you can do both.
That's what I was going to say. So potentially who takes the brunt for that level of intensity and focus? And I think it's okay for athletes to be focused. It's a good thing to have that focus, Absolutely. But it has to be balanced correctly. So I wonder, would Gaza or would other guys, who trained on Christmas Day, I wonder would they ever look back and say, was it worth it? Because I had to make some sacrifices. Some of them were worth it, but the family ones probably aren't. As you say, it's more about the person rather than the asset or the contribution to performance or success.
And I think we all get caught. I mean, I remember once when I was working at Middelsbrough Football Club, I attended a sort of gathering of the head of sports medicine and science for all of the Premier League clubs. And I think there was 20 of us in a room. 19 had been married and divorced, and I was one of them. And that tells you something. And we're not all serial philanderers. We're all more people who I remember once I went through 5 years of my career where one day I wasn't contacted by work. I don't think that's necessarily clever or good. I used to, for example, when I was at Rangers, I used to generally work 6 weeks non-stop and then take one day off. Is it any wonder I was separated? And I think, again, and I also don't think I was that efficient by the 6 week working that way either when I look back. So it's not just players, it's staff too. And I think we mirror that example. We feel as if we have to, it's a recovery day at training. So we must bring, for example, the rugby team, the football team into recover. So a player has to drive 1 hour in his car to get to the training ground to do a swim in a pool or a bike and a foam roll. Can he not do that at home and take his children to school? Is a recovery just physical? Because it's not for me. It's as much mental, emotional, cognitive. And when I see, again, laterally in my career, I saw, Pep Guardiola is one of the best football coaches the world has ever seen. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's sometimes the simple things he gets right. And I'd never seen this done before. And what he often did after an evening game would have the players in the following day for a recovery just to check they're all okay. But they're out the training ground by 12 o'clock. They were off the following day. The following day, they didn't train before 5 o'clock in the evening. So they almost had 2 days off, and they were actually spending time with their family. And I think that's maximising, recovery is not just physical, it's cognitive, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual to some. And I think, we have to come in to go on the bike, to go in the pool, to do a foam roller, to ice bath. Do we really? Do we? Who's that for? Is it actually for the S&C coaches and the medical staff because they want to feel busy, or is it for the players?
I wonder potentially could there be a bigger issue with players? I think not always, but I think a lot of players can switch off because there's so much planning involved with practitioners and S&Cs and sports science. These guys, potentially they're the ones who actually never get to switch off because guys get rotated and rested, but the practitioners are always there at games and they're always there
Absolutely.
at training.
Absolutely. And I think it's very difficult, listen, S&Cs, physios, psychologists, all of the backroom staff and the coaches, are, you're playing one game, but you're already preparing for the next. And as you rightfully said, you're rotating squads around. And I think, when we talk about balance, we're not talking about a seesaw 50-50. I spoke to a young physio the other day who I was mentoring, who works in the hospital, wants to work in sport, but he's worried about the commitment. And I said, until you can actually guarantee that you may have to work 7 days a week, don't go into sport. And I'm not saying, you should be working 9 till 5 in sport. That's impossible. It doesn't, you have to be committed to it. But actually, you've also got to see a way out of it eventually, because it's not a healthy drug to be committed to for life. It's the wonderful, I'm still involved, but I'm not involved the way I was. You could offer me all the money in the world and I wouldn't be interested because it's not going to offer what I want in my life now. And I think, don't get me wrong, I was committed for 34 years probably, and I loved it. And I was sacked, I was hired, fired, been through, it's not just highs. You've seen teams relegated, I've had to move people on. So it's not all fancy and glory. But I think yourself, and some of the highlights aren't winning major championships. And I've been fortunate, I've been with teams that have won major championships. But my major highlights are when right now, when, I haven't even seen Phil Foden's goal in the Champions League, but I've known Phil since he was 11. And when you see people talk, I get goosebumps talking about it now, because I saw a young 11-year-old boy who loved fishing, who loved his family. He's got an autistic brother who always held his brother after every game. And when I see that person lighting up people like that, I feel wonderful. And because you feel as if you've assisted. You've not done anything major on the journey, but I also reflect on the 17 boys who started that journey with Phil in that squad at Manchester City at 14. 3 are left playing professional football now. The rest are doing normal jobs. And so you think about them, and I can remember when Phil made his first team debut, I met one of those young men who at that time was unemployed for a pizza in Manchester just to check how he was doing. Because to me, the duty of care doesn't stop. He needs I said, Phil doesn't need anything from Grant Downie. He's going on. He's got all the great support team around him. But those who need the support, who are trying to find their way back into a normal life, and playing professional sport's not normal.
Absolutely. It takes a bit of getting used to, as you call it, the afterlife, when things finish and you got to find your feet and just find this new career, and just the things that would have been acceptable, or the behaviors that would be typical in the sports team, they're not typical anymore. And all of a sudden there's this whole new skill set, and it's culture shock coming out of professional sport.
It's a culture spot, and at the end of the day, irrespective of how good you are, and you could be the best rugby player, the best cricketer, the best hockey player, the best footballer in the world, it ends at some stage. And I think the sooner we start preparing for that end, to give people options, because the one thing sport will give you, as you're doing, it'll give you the opportunity to branch out possibly into business ventures, to do things that could give back to sport. It might be nothing to do with the sport. I have quite I wouldn't say heavy, but a big involvement with female sport at the moment, and I love it, because there's an opportunity to do things that we've not done in the men's football badly. We don't have to do in the women's game. But the one thing we've talked heavily about is, from a young age, having dual careers. We may eventually have a female player who retires, who may never have to work again, but I don't think that's just not around the corner, because of but actually, female sport finally has been given a pedestal. And I recently was working, with a franchise in one of the teams, and I was talking to the leadership team, because we're just reviewing the standards. And I was saying to them, where did they see it fitting into their culture and their development, and where did they see it? And they were talking about, equality to the men's game. And I went, I'm going to say something a bit controversial here, because actually, I don't think equality exists in the men's game. So how can it exist between men and women? Because not all men are paid the same. So you can't be paid the same if they're bringing in X million pounds to the business and you're only bringing in 2 or 3. But what we can ensure is quality and fairness. And the two are quite different to me. And I think, but what is vital, as women's sport rightfully gets the pedestal it deserves, is we look at the staffing structure, the support structure, to make sure that they are well looked after. But I think where they could be even better looked after than the men is have this dual career thing at the beginning, because they're going to have that for certain. You're not going to play, female probably football for 10 years and not need another career.
There will be people who will argue that what we're talking about here, what we're perceiving that as a benefit, but there will be people who argue that, well, they don't get the opportunity to be focused and single-minded and do the only thing that's important to them. So in a way, what we're suggesting is saving them from themselves.
And the one thing I value more than anything else is different opinion. As long as we share, so what do we want? And so if you think about what would I want to see with the women's game, I would like to see full-time professional female athletes from the age of probably somewhere between 18 and 21, so maybe a dual career with university, then a chance to dedicate themselves, but actually that training at that time facilitates another career. And you and I know, and you've played professional sports, so you know this better than anyone, there's quite a lot of downtime. You're often in hotels, you're often having to travel on a morning or let's say you're playing an international match. You'll go through the captain's run through the morning. You'll go back to the team hotel. Now, with all due respect, you don't really need to be thinking about the game from 1 o'clock on the Friday afternoon before this. Well, if you do, you're going to not play very well on the Saturday. You've got to have that what I call dial that tones it down a bit. Maybe that's a chance to do a couple of seminars just to use your brain about something else, and it's better to switch off. You'll sleep better at night. And so, if you think of the ability through the internet to do distant learning, I think you can combine both. And I think that's where the women's game can take a big leap forward from, don't just copy what the men did, because a lot of what the men did is wrong.
Yeah, learn from it. Let's learn from it.
Let's learn from it, exactly. And don't make the same blooming mistakes. What's the definition of insanity from Einstein? Doing the same process and expecting a different outcome. So don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's where it can be better. And it can be, I can remember when I first got involved with the Manchester City women's team, and I can remember doing a talk. And I did a talk, and I think it was in the first year, and I remember Googling Steph Horton's name to get a picture, and I had to troll down Google to find her name, and it came down, I don't know, about 100th on the list. If you Google Steph Horton now, Steph, it'll come, hers will probably be number 1 or 2 in Google. That tells you how much the game has grown. And I did a little talk to a primary school recently, and I love talking to young children because, they're the future. They're the ones who are going to play sport. And you need to inspire these people by telling them stories of, and I love the questions they ask you because children are so, who's your favourite player you've ever worked with? And it was funny, it was a primary school. And I'm glad they gave me an advance because they gave me a chance. There's no point talking about Rangers or Middelsbrough. None of them were born then. So it's got to be a Manchester City player. So it's a mixed class of boys and girls. And so it's a Manchester City player. You've got 3 guesses. And as usual, it was Sergio Aguero. No. It was Vincent Kompany. No. It was David Silva. No. I said, it's Jill Scott. And they went, oh, yeah, you've got a women's team, haven't you? I said, Jill Scott is one of the best balanced human beings I've ever worked with in my life. So if you're asking me who's my favourite player, she's my favourite player. She just happens to be a female.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that kind of inherent, kind of going to what people know or what is more high profile. And as you say,
Exactly.
the women's game is starting to challenge that and start to get on people's radar, and just higher profile female players, more support in general, and more people back in the game is what we all want to see.
But what we need to also ensure, and that's where my role comes in, is to make sure that these teams have the right support staff. So do they, for example, have 2 physiotherapists? Do they have a soft tissue therapist if they need? Do they have a psychologist? Do they have the support? And so with the growth of it, people have to realise the expenditure will get greater. But actually, if you're going to want the professionalism as it should be, there should be a model that supports it accordingly. And I think that's the transition, because I've seen again, that's why I'm involved with one franchise, because at the moment they're looking at it to say, we think we're here, but we think we need to do things better. But that to me is a mark of high performance, because in high performance, I've got a very healthy dissatisfaction of the level of performance, which means if we want something, how do we win the next trophy?
Yes.
Because actually, if you celebrate too long on what you're winning, there are so many teams you've seen who've done that, who have gone out and wined and dined on their success, and then it's over. And I can also remember travelling back with probably the most influential manager I ever worked with, Walter Smith, from my Rangers time, and we just won 9 championships in a row, which was a tremendous equaling feat to what Celtic had achieved previously. And, you're travelling back on a bus with great satisfaction. And I remember Walter was looking out the window, and I just sat and I said, Gaffer, what are you thinking about? How do I win 10?
Yeah.
And that was about 2 hours after winning 9.
I know.
And that's healthy to a point.
It's to a point, because actually one of the things that I would look back on my career, and I only had a couple of kind of big moments really with Ulster. We won one thing with Ireland. We won 6 Nations, and any kind of small wins, really not so much, winning European Cup or 6 Nations, that sort of thing. Those were rare, but any kind of small wins, I would look back at my career and I wish someone had told me to enjoy them more. So
you're right. And I think I took that into my last job at Manchester City, where we would celebrate small wins. So, for example, I remember when I was still working in the academy, someone like Phil Foden and another young player had been away, and they'd come on as subs for the first team. So we made sure we had a special lunch that day. It's just the little things you should celebrate. Yeah. Because as you say, if you think back to, I've been very lucky. I've been involved in professional sport for 35 years now, and probably won 30 sort of significant trophies. But that's not many, really, but it's a lot. But what I'm saying is, as you say, it's not about celebrating those. Sometimes for me, when, you know, like now, I still like looking less and less because I'm getting older. But when I look through the paper and see who's still playing, and you think, well, that player, tore his ACL. I recently saw a coach who tore his ACL when I was at Rangers at 16, had a significant other knee injury, and yet he finished playing at 34, and he's now a coach. And it was lovely to have a conversation with him about him, because you feel as if, those are the things you celebrate too, because those are you've helped someone achieve their dreams. And I think, but the dreams, you want to make them, as you say, yes, about sport, because that's so important, but about life. And it's like today. I mean, I live in a beautiful island in the Isle of Arran. I'm looking out the window and I realise sport has helped me achieve that. Because without sport, I wouldn't at 58 be able to live on an island, when I say I didn't build the house, I got the house built. But actually, I still like yesterday, I was outside, there was a beautiful heron by the river, and I take a lot of pictures, and I take them because my father introduced them, my late father, a number of years ago, where he got me to collect golf balls out the river and sell them to golfers. And I actually waded in yesterday and found 3 golf balls that helped me. But I still remember what's important to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's where sometimes when you walk in elite sport, you can forget it. You can get too wrapped up in thinking, Joe's got a new car, I need a new car. Joe's got a new watch, I need a new watch. Well, one tells the time, one drives you from A to B.
Absolutely. No, it's important to maintain that perspective. Grant, we've talked a lot about football here. I'm dying to find out about your experience of Cirque Du Soleil and the transition. I talked there about culture shock of moving from professional sport into business. There must have been culture shock going from football into Cirque Du Soleil.
Do you know, I don't think it... Well, there isn't. I mean, I don't look on football as football. It's just entertainment business, and so Cirque Du Soleil. And, it depends on, if you look at football, is it science or is it art? I think it's the combination of lots of little bits of science to be an art performance performed by people under pressure on a stage, which happens to be played in front of people. Cirque Du Soleil is no different. But yet these people are naturally much more, shall we say, they're from a gymnastic background, from a dancing background. And actually, again, I was asked to go out to Cirque Du Soleil just to look at a few aspects of why they were picking up a number of injuries in their performers. I'd done the same with Royal Ballet, but I invite these people in to look at football to give me their perspective. It's not me thinking I'm clever, I know this. It's actually trying to apply your trade in a slightly lateral direction, but inviting them back. So if you take ballet, first of all, ballet picked up a lot of stress fractures, and one of the problems with ballet dancers is they have to perform, like Cirque Du Soleil, probably 300 days a year. They have to train during the day and they rarely eat. So all we did with them was put little nutritional stations around each performance so they could eat a small amount. But with Cirque Du Soleil, it was, as you say, trying to understand you have to perform, as I said to you, often six days a week and 1 day a week twice. And it's fascinating when you actually get the chance to go backstage, because you've got this theatre performance with, say, 2,000 people watching. There's a white line you don't cross because that's where the lights are. And you're talking to a performer just like you and I are. Then they go and do the performance. So I stood next to the guy who gets lit on fire, walks around the stage and then jumps into a bath. And I'm standing next to him. He said, I've got to go in a second, Grant, because I've got to get on fire. And so someone then lights him and he's got 3 seconds to do a few somersaults and end up in a bath. And if he spends 3.5 seconds, he gets burnt.
Jeez, that's. I mean, what I was gonna ask you was, or make the comparison, I suppose, between professional football. There's an objective measure of success, and that's you win or you lose. Now, it's not the only measure of success. There's more to it, obviously. But you don't get that with Cirque Du Soleil. Now, granted, in that example, the success is, completing the task and staying alive.
It's staying alive and probably making an audience clap and enjoy it. And I think if you go to concerts or you go to theatre, whatever you do, what I loved about watching things like that, I find it so mindless. My mind just switches off, and you watch people doing things you can't do yourself. And I think, the appreciation they get. And it was funny when you talk with the Circle of Life of sport. I can remember when I went to Cirque Du Soleil, and the first time they said, sit in the front row, watch what you see. And it was quite funny. They brought the clowns come out, and just start doing some funny things. And I'm looking at one of the clowns thinking, I know you. And he's looking at me too. And I sort of shout, your name's Terry Bartlett, isn't it? He goes, "Yeah." And Terry Bartlett used to be a gymnast who I actually helped look after when he was at Lillishall when I first went to him. And 32 years later, he's on the stage on Cirque Du Soleil performing, and I'm in the front row of the crowd at Las Vegas.
Wow.
It's a small world sport.
Small world.
And actually, but then we spoke afterwards and he'd had a hip replacement, but he's still performing and he can't do what he used to do. But after he left gymnastics, and after he performed at 1992 Olympics in Barcelona and I went as their physio, he then, I think 2 years later, retired, having done 3 Olympics, and he went out to Las Vegas and he's married there, he's got 3 children, and he leads a happy life. And, and again, it's kind of, not all stories end with happiness in sport, we know that, but actually, that was a great transition for him. And as you say, if you talk to traditional ballet teachers and say the Cirque people, they think it's pure art, but it's not. And it's really interesting. There's a big movement, particularly in ballet at the moment, and I think it's right to bring in things like strength and conditioning coaches. Because in the past, let's say if they were conditioning the calf, and you know yourself, you want to get your calf stronger in rugby, so you've got better triple extension. You'll do a lot of weightlifting. You want to get now. You would think a ballet dancer shouldn't do weightlifting, but they should, because at the moment they're doing 400 calf repetitions. Where actually, if they probably lifted a bar with half of their body weight on and did 40, they'd get the same effect. Mm-hmm. So therefore, bringing some of the scientific principles, I think, into these art performance should be done, but we should always remember. But sport, when you play rugby, it isn't pure science.
It's
there's rugby is probably more. You have to be physically strong. You'll not survive in a rugby field. I get that completely. But actually, on one given day, you take my own nation this year. How can Scotland go and win at Twickenham and Paris and lose? Ireland thumped them at Murrayfield, and probably we were slightly unlucky. I'm biased, I know, Wales. But what I'm saying is, how can that happen? How can that happen? But that's the beauty of sport.
I think you were more than slightly unlucky with Wales. Well, obviously the red card was what it was, and it was probably fair enough. But Wales were very lucky this Six Nations.
Well, Wales had a season where everything went fairly right for them. And if he's a good friend of mine, it's funny, when I was watching the Welsh France match, I was almost thinking, if Wales win the Grand Slam, no disrespect, because I don't want to sound bitter, but they've probably had the rub of the green. And actually, the ironic French try in the last minute, probably a lot of us sat back and thought, well, there's maybe a little bit of justice in this world after all. And that sounds awful, because there's some wonderful Welsh players, and when I saw some of their play and their tries, they were superb, and it was a great. This was I think rugby for the first time in the Northern Hemisphere, we probably have 5 very equal teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. I think Wales certainly did not look like Grand Slam contenders at the start of their tournament. But it just shows you how, and we're talking about the science versus art, the art of, kind of getting a little bit of luck and then that impacting your confidence and actually starting to perform like Grand Slam contenders, going to Paris and pushing France all the way to the end.
Absolutely. And also what you get in sport is, I'm a great believer of belief is the enemy of doubt. If you think you're going to win, you generally can win. Again, it's just like, I'm a Scottish rugby fan, have been all my life. I work in sport, but rugby is my passion to watch. And when I watch Scotland, this is awful. I generally don't think we're going to win before we start. Mm-hmm. That's a terrible way to start a game, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I know it is, but it takes a level of consistency. Like Scotland, Stuart Hogg comes out every year and says how they're in it to win it, and everybody kind of goes, oh, okay. I think now everybody go, okay, they're actually, you definitely have taken a step forward. We need to take you a lot more seriously. But until Scotland do that 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a row,
absolutely,
then you go, now we can start to expect it.
And that's exactly it. Yeah. And I think when you look at some of the ingredients of the top teams, irrespective if it's rugby, hockey, netball, football, they have consistent performers. And you know that from the Irish squad you were involved in, because you had some real leaders in those squad who actually they know how to go about things, and winning doesn't start just before you play the game. It starts in your close season. It starts with your these are the way we're going to do things on the pitch. This is how we're going to do things off the pitch. And I think, again, that healthy dissatisfaction. And someone once described it to me as, imagine there's 25,000 stones on a beach. One of them's got the answer. The top performers turn them all over. And if they don't find the answer, they start again. Those who've got an excuse, say my back hurts after 15,000 and give up. And those are the ones that when you're needing that down to 14 men and Ulster need one more try, you get it. Because they dig, and it's sport is a culmination of, I think, getting the right on-field players and they're the most important bit, but then the right coaching staff, the right, shall we say, performance staff, but everyone shares that common purpose. You all have your own individual way in life, and you don't have to get on, you don't have to like each other either, but actually once you get onto that field or the training field, you switch. And we've got a common purpose here because we want Ulster to be the best team in Europe. But it doesn't mean you've got to go on and go for a drink with them. It doesn't mean you want to go and have a beer with them. You don't need to do that. Mm-hmm. Some people say that's the best bonding, but it isn't today. Mm-hmm. Not everyone wants to do that. Some people might be happy going to an art gallery. And if they are, fine. Mm-hmm. Let them.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to be best friends, but you need to have that mutual respect and understanding.
Absolutely.
And trust.
And that commonality of, and how to, and I call it dig each other out in the right way, in the sense of, work out, this is the way we do things around here. And everyone buys it. So for example, if you decide on time is important, and let's say it is for this case, if the physio arrives 5 minutes late to treat you, he or she should be fined. Mm-hmm. If that's what you're doing. It shouldn't just be the players. Mm-hmm. It should be a mutual respect. And if, for example, we decide we don't want, like in my case, when I was running a medical room, I didn't want any phones, I didn't want any papers, I didn't want any drinks in the medical area. If I, as the person who's leading the department, walks in holding my phone, drinking a cup of coffee, I'd like you to tell me, Grant, do you mind leaving, please? Because that's right. Mm-hmm. Irrespective of hierarchy, that's standards.
Mm-hmm. So, Grant, let's talk a little bit about. So, you've obviously got a lot of kind of key kind of principles and philosophies that you've developed and kind of challenged, I'm sure, in different environments. You've spoken in the past about your experience with Les Autres. The group of disabled athletes that went to the games in New York, and how much of a profound impact that had on your philosophy and your understanding of that type of role. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that shaped you.
Yeah, well, this was pre the Paralympics being the big event it is now. And this was Les Autres was a games to encourage other athletes to express themselves, and some of them had profound disabilities, from cerebral palsy to being blind to be amputees. And what we took a couple of athletes out who were competing, but more importantly, we took a group of grossly disabled athletes and two who were going to die within a year. And one of them was 18, one of them was 21. And my job was to help look after them. And I was 20, how was I at the time? I would have been 21. And you never really faced anything like death or thought about it. And yet I was having to help dress, wash, cater, turn people over at night in bed who were my age but about to die. And, it does it. I'm thinking about it now and it just brings an emotion back to you because, you have conversations with young men who are quite bitter, but understandably so. And see their life ending in a wheelchair, as one of them, I remember, once said to me, I've never kissed a girl. That was his biggest regret in life before he died. And, it's filling me with a bit of emotion thinking about it now, because what do you do when someone says that to you? And you can go out and party at that age and, get up to mischief as we all do at that age, and that person can't. Mm-hmm. And I think then you're helping people like that try and have an experience of a life, and that's all you can do. And what it taught me was life is limited. We're all going to sadly one day die. Actually, can you fill it full of memorable experiences? And it made me realize that these two boys were going to die a lot quicker than definitely than I was. But actually, how can we fulfill some of their wishes and wants with a wonderful trip and make it as enjoyable as possible? And then when you see an amputee who's lost one leg from above the knee, high jump 6 feet 10 inches, Nothing's impossible.
You've obviously applied your what you learned or how you were challenged at the time into that's kind of impacted what we've kind of gone about this the other way around. So we've understood your philosophy, and now we're getting to grips with how that came about, or certainly a contributing factor to that, because that's massively shaped your understanding the person, not just the performer.
Exactly, and I think and that's it in a nutshell. What I learned from that is behind every performer and by every person we see sitting there is a person. And every person, and as you get older, you learn more about it. You realize we're all vulnerable. And actually, vulnerability is a great human connection if you're prepared to admit it. And I wouldn't say lucky, but maybe I was dyslexic at school, which meant I had to be taken out of mainstream education in the time of where I was called remedial. So I was known as a remedial child and taken to another school to learn. But I found a teacher who found a way that I could learn. And that ignited me to realize I did have something inside me. But I then realized by also expressing your own vulnerabilities, and we don't do this very well in professional sport, as you can imagine, because we're all alpha males. Well, the males are. And they all think, we've got this, we've got this, I've got good biceps, I can do this, I can do that. But underneath it, we've all got insecurities. There's all things. And I found if you could actually connect those to the person who was an athlete you were looking after, they related to you. They would talk to you. They realized, I was never there to, and we'll probably talk about this maybe a bit later, if we won, yeah, it was nice to win, and I liked winning. But if we lost, it wasn't the end of the world. There was the next game. And I think as backroom staff, you have to show that level of understanding. So when, for example, signing players in a medical, I would try and ask a lot about the player, about where they came from, about their mother, their father, brothers, sisters, marriage, children. And often, because again, once I got a bit older, let's say we're signing a Dutch player. When I was at Rangers, or what was Dick Advocat with Arthur Newman there with Giovanni. I know Giovanni van Bronckhorst. That's interesting. So you create a connection. And I think again, and you'll know this yourself very well from your playing days, I think you quite like sometimes medical staff to be very non-judgmental of how you've played, just to how you are as a person. Mm-hmm. And I often used to say that to players in the morning, because I used to say, how are you? Oh, my knees. I didn't ask how your knee was. I said, how are you? Mm-hmm. I'll come on to your knee in a minute. And I think sometimes it's nice to have, and so I think these things made me realize that, as I said to you, that, I've worked with some of the, shall we say, so-called, and they are some of the best players, this country from the UK and Ireland has produced. But they all can cry, Mm-hmm. They're all vulnerable at times. And I'm a great believer if they can see your vulnerability. And I remember talking to one of the young players who's aspiring and will probably play if he doesn't play for Manchester City's first team, he'll definitely play for a senior Premier League team in one day. And he's nearly there now. And I remember talking to him as a young boy about something that was going on in his life that he found difficult at school. And then I remember when I told him how I found school very difficult, I still can't really read out loud now. So if you ask me to read out something loud I can't prepare, I haven't got time to prepare, I find that gets my heart racing still. Mm-hmm. And when I told him this, he was like, gosh, do you really find that difficult? And afterwards he used to come and talk to me every day about it, because he realised I was a human being. And I think there's a great TED talk by a lady called Rennie Brown about the importance of vulnerability. And actually, when we're macho men in rugby football, we think, we're not vulnerable. We are as human beings. Mm-hmm. You're always thinking, one day I won't be playing this sport. What am I going to be doing next? That's vulnerability. Mm-hmm. But do we talk about it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Did you have a mentor, Grant?
Did I have a mentor? I've had a number of mentors, but it's really interesting. And where did I put it? I looked this out just before. This is. I don't know if you can see that there. What it says there. I got a Christmas card. I moved to the Isle of Arran. I got a Christmas card this year, and it says, to Grant Downie, sorry, postman, Isle of Arran. So they didn't even know where I lived in the Isle of Arran. But it arrived. It got through my front door. And that was from a 78-year-old, in fact, she's older than that now, she's probably 84-year-old lady whose late husband was one of my first mentors. Mm-hmm. And it was just a Christmas card she sent me. I remember, sadly, he died about 5 years ago. And I went from Manchester to Glasgow to his funeral, had a quick chat to her, didn't really have much chance to see her. And she just wanted to make reference to the fact of how much I meant to them. But more importantly, I can relate how much he did for me. And I think mentorship I think is so important for players, for backroom staff, just to have a non-judgmental person to sometimes let off steam, who will occasionally say, are you really going to do that? Which is basically saying, what the heck are you going to do that for? But actually let you make your mistakes, guide you, be there for you, and challenge you. So mentorship, for me, I'm a great believer in. We don't have enough leaders today because we don't have enough mentors allowing people to express themselves. We're very much pigeonholed. We turn up at training, we do this, we do this, we do this. And so mentorship, to me, I've been lucky. I've had a number throughout my career and still use people. And still I'm very happy to, express my vulnerabilities to people because I have them, as we all do.
Grant, you've talked a little bit about outcomes and ownership. Whenever you're talking about the example you give there about recovering from an ACL and how that should be celebrated, it struck me that that's something that a whole squad get behind. Whenever someone plays the first game having not played in a year and a half, that's something that really kind of resonates with everyone. Everybody gets behind that and everybody celebrates it and everybody's so happy for them because they see all the work going on behind the scenes. And that's what I'm thinking about here. Being key to optimal rehabilitation is what you talked about. Outcomes and ownerships. Tell us a little bit about how that ownership in particular applies to that rehab progress and being part of it rather than being just told what to do, because I think a lot of athletes just get told what to do rather than being part of the plan.
First of all, the athlete should be center of it, and we'll call it the athlete so it's generic to all sport. I think you've got to sit down with that person, and we'll choose the ACL as an example. It's pretty devastating news to a 25, 26, 27-year-old player because they know they're going to miss 6 to 9 months. For a 19-year-old, they've probably never even witnessed another player having it, not aware of it, and they're probably a bit blasé. All right, yeah, I'll do that. And so, but I think what you've got to do from the beginning is sit down with them and talk about outcomes that they want to hold to, and you will hold them accountable to in a nice way. So, for example, someone who's out with an ACL, generally, again, the research says don't rush back in the first 6 months, because if you get back in 6 months, you're twice as likely to injure it if you take 9 months. And it doesn't mean just take it easier. It means just consolidate each step. But what I'm a great believer with the athletes that I'm working with is sit down and show them the milestones. So at 6 weeks, I'd like you to be able to achieve this. At 12 weeks this, at 18 weeks this, at 24 this. And then I say to them, but I'd like you to take that away and turn that into your language. And what does it then mean to you? But also on top of that, within that, shall we say, that 9-month framework, I'm going to give you 4 5-day breaks. You can choose them when you like, as long as you hit those milestones. If you can't, you don't get to choose them. And in fact, you won't get them.
And what sort of stuff do they put in there for those?
Well, they often put things down like, they want to sometimes work on other aspects of their game, and they want to realise that this is an opportunity. The fitness coach has told them for a long time they've got a weak posterior chain. Can I work with a fitness coach on that? Brilliant. Or for example, they'd like to maybe do some analysis work more, watching opposition, and listen, we'll fit that into your timetable. We all also, and I often say to them, did you ever like playing different sports? I'm a great believer with an ACL. At like 4 months, you can start playing badminton, you can start playing table tennis, you can start doing something a little bit different. We can maybe start playing, if it's a football tennis where you play over a net. So you do something a little bit different, and you develop, and what I used to do, I remember once we went through this period at Middelsbrough, we had about 4 significant knee injuries in a short period of time. No reason, but it just happened. So what we did is we set up a little badminton league. So I used to get and also I brought carpet balls in. So when they were actually 6 weeks and just able to walk again, I brought in a big little bit of carpet and I put it down for an hour 3 times a week. And actually what we allowed was the one who won the carpet balls over 3 days got the afternoon off on a Friday.
It's important.
And the worst player had to make a cake for the staff. So you do things that are slightly, what's the right word, engaging that human being. But you say to them, but also the other thing I would say to them, listen, you've got children. This is your first opportunity. Would you like to take your kids in school? You can start later, but you'll finish at 4.
Yeah, very good.
And brilliant. Can I start at 11? Absolutely fine. Because I can deal with all the players who need strapped, who need to go and train. And we have this idea that everyone needs to come in together because we're a team. Actually, for the athlete who is not going out to train. That's the most demoralising time when the team leave. So sometimes getting them in slightly later and staying later means you could give them more time. And I think, again, you ask them to... There might be things like they say to you, the kids have got a concert. Do you mind if I take that, that half day on a Friday? And I go, well, why don't you actually, the team are in Saturday, Sunday. Why don't you come in Saturday, Sunday, take the whole Friday off? Mm-hmm. So there's negotiation. So there's ownership to them. And again, and often it's sometimes making exercises very relevant. And I also remember a young lad who had a very significant ankle injury. And I was telling him the importance of getting what we call weight-bearing dorsiflexion back. So basically getting your ankle, or you need to push over your foot, because your ankle, if you ever hurt your ankle, gets very stiff. And his ability to get what we call knee to wall, I think, was 10 centimetres. And after the surgery, it was only 2 or 3. And he used to say to me, what's the significance of it? So I remember once telling him, what's the significance of your career? He said, well, one day I want to play for Wales and I want to put a lot of money in the bank because I want to be wealthy. And I went, well, every centimetre is worth £100,000. Because if you never get to 10, you're never going to make $1 million. And he used to then text me at night, Grant, I put £200,000 in the bank today. I've gained 2 centimetres. But that motivated him.
Mm-hmm. So you tap into whatever it is, what that makes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you've got to tap into what theirs is. And it doesn't matter what you think it should be, it's theirs. Mm-hmm. That's ownership then.
Yeah.
Because I used to occasionally text him, how much money did you put in the bank today? I've got 400,000 down. Or actually, I'm down 1,000 today. That means he's probably done too much work because he's lost a bit of movement. So it's turning the rehabilitation from a medical scientific term into player language, because he realised he was not going to earn £1 million until he got full dorsiflexion. There was other things he had to gain too, other tests too, but that actually created a language that he liked and turned in. He now is a full Welsh international.
Mm-hmm. I know guys who have been motivated by proving one person who said they were never going to make it whenever they were a teenager.
Absolutely.
Proving them wrong, and whatever it is that gets you going, lean on it.
I think what you try and do is, I try and, where possible, make it as task orientated as possible. So it's a bit like, I remember once seeing a player tear his hamstring badly because his ego wanted to sprint against another player who's always going to be quicker than him. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit like, listen, you could go and see the best sprint coach in the world, and every sprint coach you work with can make you quicker, but can't make you fast. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speed is inherent. Yeah. You can make people quicker, but you can't make them fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's important, but you're right. And sometimes using that mantra is so important. And I've seen it in all sports. And again, that comes back to that adversity bit. We've hit adversity, and usually top class sports, women and men, usually face that with, right, I'm going to prove you. But what we've got to do is then work out the steps how to do that, rather than just saying I'm going to conquer it. But you're right. And I think rehabilitation is sitting down with the player and saying, this is what I want, but what do you want? And then we'll make this for you. And I think the principles are the same. But again, it's a mantra I use a lot. In 34 years, I've never once treated an injury. But I have treated thousands of people who are injured. There's a big difference. And I think it's all right. It's like now. I was speaking to one of the Scottish Premier League football clubs yesterday about potentially me doing some work with them, and they were talking about maybe me mentoring the physio. And I went, I'm not going to mentor your physio, but I've got someone who can do that for you, and we'll use that money. But I said, why won't you do it? And I said, well, the last time I practiced being a physio in professional sport was 7 years ago. I've got someone who's doing it today. I could do it, but I know someone who can do it better. Mm-hmm. And so I think the strengths of anybody is knowing what they don't know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'll be prepared to admit that.
You find coaches that do that as well, bringing in a staff around them, because one coach might say, right, this is my strength. I'm going to bring in someone else who can look after this, someone who can look after this. And actually, this kind of reminds me a little bit of our conversation earlier on about the artist and the scientist. You find coaching staff where they've got a lovely balance of like one scientist, one artist.
Absolutely.
And if you're the artist, bring in a scientist.
Exactly. And I think, when you're, again, I look back and when I've recruited people, and when I did it badly, and I have done it badly, I recruited people who were like me. when I've done it well, I've brought people who are different to me but share the same values. And that's the key bit. Have you got the same purpose on the journey? And actually, you want people who think differently. And I used to work with a psychologist at Manchester City, Dr. Cherry Daly. And Cherry Daly and I are very, very good friends, but yet we're very different. But yet now, and I'm quite, what's the right word? I'm fast-paced. I like to work. I like to get things done, where she's quite slow, methodical. So if we're a car, I'm the accelerator, she's the brake. But if you think about it, a car needs a brake, but it needs an accelerator. And so when I now have to make quick decisions, I often think, what would she do? Mm-hmm. Because she wouldn't probably do what I'd do, but it doesn't mean I'm going to do what she does, but it gives me a check. Mm-hmm. And I think good background teams have different personalities who have different things. And as players, you'll warm to ones more than others. If you're the particularly detailed player, you want that detail, you'll warm to that person. If you're more the class clown, as I say, you'll warm to Finn Russell's.
Yes, absolutely. And every team needs that combination.
Absolutely. And need both. Mm-hmm. And we need both. And that's what I'm saying. A team does not need to be made up of everyone the same way. It's got to have people who can do things differently, who on their day will spark others. And I think that the rugby was one of those sports in the past, and it still is a little bit, but has lost a little bit of that. It was for every shape and size. It isn't probably as such now, but it still is to a point, because you can still have, a 5'9" scrum half who's the most important player on the pitch. Mm-hmm.
No, in the Finn Russell example, I think is a perfect one, because for a long period and regularly now as well, everything he touches turns to gold. He's just so talented. But then everybody talks about the final against Exeter, and he threw that intercept. Exeter got back, Exeter got into the game, and it was kind of his fault. And there were so many commentators and pundits afterwards talking about Finn Russell. He just needs to manage his game. He just needs to be a little bit more pragmatic. And I know that is the last thing you want to do with Finn Russell. Let him thrive, and occasionally he's going to make a mistake.
Absolutely, you have to accept with him that if he's going to manage his game time, Scotland would not have beaten England. I think it was 4 years, I can't remember, 3 years ago at Murrayfield.
With the long pass, I think the world's greatest pass.
That was one of the world's greatest passes, but you and I know was about 5 centimetres away from being the world's worst pass.
Yes.
But that's the fine line. Uh-huh. And actually we pay to watch that. And and that's why, in that big debate, should he be on the Lions tour? I would imagine he will go along, because you'll take 3 fly halves. And the good news is he's probably the right person to be on the bench if you need someone to win a match.
I think he can do something that's different to anybody else.
So do I.
I don't know if you'd start him, but as you say,
exactly, and I get that too. And I think, but that's the and again, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think sport loves mavericks, and Finn's I would say, I don't know him, so I'd be wrong to say he's a maverick, but he plays like a maverick. He plays like Paul Gascoigne plays football, and again, mavericks are really different, and they're fascinating. And I think we have to be careful. Our modern sporting model is discouraging that. And George Best was a maverick, and let's say the off the field bit, well, yes, was too much, but the ability, and I saw this with Paul Gascoigne. I used to watch him train. And why I used to love just watching him, I didn't know what he was going to do. But if you asked him, he didn't know what he was going to do either. But I think these players have this inbuilt computer that they see everything so much clearer than you and I do. And they can see, and I can remember one saying to him, why did you make that pass? And he went, well, I just watched that player, and if you watch very closely, he moved one way, which I knew then meant it could pass the other way. And after watching it about 10 times on the replay, I got it. Mm-hmm. But it took me about half an hour. Yes. And he sees that in a split second.
Mm-hmm. That's where someone possesses something that can't be coached. They just spot something.
No, exactly.
And that's what's so exciting about professional sport and different types of athletes, and the Finn Russells of this world. That's the type of player we want to see. And you know what that will mean? I think that will mean for Scotland, if they were all Finn Russells, that would mean we'd be even less certain about what Scotland can do. So it can't be all Finn Russells. You need...
No, exactly.
No,
you don't. And as you said, and it's how a team, if you take, cricket, someone like Shane Warne was a little bit of a maverick that way. And yet their contribution can be massive, but it can be the downfall too. So it's knowing, and I hope for Scotland, for the team he plays in France, in Paris, he will be, and probably playing French rugby is perfect for him because the way they play French rugby. But you hope. Well, I think people like that put bums on seats, as I call it, because I want to go and see them play. I want to go and see that. And if you think about when Scotland beat France recently, and I think it was Adam Hastings who did a similar pass for the last try. Do you think he would have made that pass if he'd never seen Finn Russell not try it?
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Because you and I are inspired by the generation of slightly before us, and you would never, invariably there has to be someone. Roger Bannister probably said, "I'm going to break the 4-minute mile," and everyone laughed at him. Now everyone breaks the 4-minute mile. Someone's got to be that, that first dancer. Someone's got to be brave enough to say, I'm going to backheel a penalty. But I probably wouldn't try it at football or rugby, but someone might one day.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have to.
We'll reconnect. We'll do another podcast whenever someone backheels a penalty.
When they do that. Exactly.
I look forward to catching up with you then. Grant, listen, this has been brilliant. I've really enjoyed picking your brains on anything and everything, and you've provided a lot of stuff to think about. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.